Hello and welcome back for another Sheriff of Studying video. Lately I've been trying to post some video responses to some of the most common questions that I receive by direct message or email. If you've missed any of that, then go ahead and subscribe already to this channel, or I'll post some links to some of the previous videos below. But around this time of year, the most common question that I get is some variation of this. What if I don't match? And this is a tough question. It's tough in part because it's just a tough issue. No applicant wants to be in this situation, and even though it's not really justified, going unmatched often results in intense feelings of shame and failure, and it's hard to have a frank conversation about it. But the other reason it's hard is that everyone's situation is different, and the optimal strategy, if you find yourself unmatched, it's usually circumstance specific. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try to lay out my general approach, and I'm going to try to highlight some of the broad areas in which the best strategy might differ. So just realize your mileage may vary. My first piece of advice, though, applies to everyone, and that is take care of yourself. For better or worse, we live in a society in which a doctor isn't something that you do, it's something that you are. It's part of your identity for so many people that are in medicine. And so for those of you who have put in the toil and the tears to go through all this training and make it to what seems like the final hurdle and then things stall out, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a gut punch. And so my first piece of advice, and this supersedes anything else that I'm going to say about decision making or strategy, is take care of yourself. Surround yourself with people who truly care about you, and filter out everyone else. Take a deep breath, and remember, this is not the end, even though it may feel like that when you first get that news. It may help to remember that you're not alone. Actually, there's lots of people who go unmatched. 1 out of 14 MD seniors goes unmatched. 1 out of 11 DO seniors does too. For international medical graduates and previous MD and DO graduates, the odds of matching are more like a coin flip. Now, it may not feel like this because when applicants match at their number one choice, you're going to know about it. I mean, you're going to see their post on Instagram, hashtag blessed. When people match, they go and tell it on the mountain. But when people don't match, they have a tendency to suffer in silence. You don't hear from them. So I want you to know that they're out there just like you are. Actually, there's thousands of folks out there just like you. And more to the point, there's thousands upon thousands of physicians who are out there in medical practice who initially went unmatched. So the data that I'm showing you here is from the NRMP. You'll notice that I've got listed 2 different match rates for each different educational background category. And that's because the way that the NRMP calculates the match rate actually underestimates the real number of applicants who are unable to find a residency position. The NRMP only considers what they call active applicants, and that's the solid bar on this graph. To be an active applicant, you have to have submitted a rank order list. Of course, there are some applicants out there who they were trying everything they could to get into a residency, but their application got screened out on the front end and they got no interview offers. So they ended up with no programs to rank, but they don't withdraw from the match because they want to participate in the SOAP. And so when you factor in that number, you get the dotted bars that I've got to the right of each of those educational categories. Now, as you can see from the red and blue bars, there aren't many graduating MD and DO students who fall into this no interviews, no rank list category. So their match rates are almost identical whether we use the NRMP definition or we include everyone who didn't withdraw from the match. But for international medical graduates, there's a significant number of applicants who don't get any interest from programs initially and have to try again in the SOAP. So the NRMP match rate more significantly underestimates the number of applicants who can't get a position in the match. But regardless of whether you were shocked to be unmatched or just disappointed, it still sucks. And it's fair to acknowledge that, and you should feel entitled to grieve. But try not to let that grief paralyze you because you got work to do. Now, the first piece of work that I've got for you is to be a doctor and diagnose the problem. There's lots of reasons why applicants don't match, and often applicants know exactly what the reason is in their case. But in my experience, sometimes they don't. And even if you think you do know, my strong advice to you is that you should at least spend a few minutes to carefully consider whether you have the right diagnosis. Because the reason that you went unmatched may influence the strategy that you take in the future and the decisions that you'll make in the near term. And I'm going to explain what I mean over the next couple of minutes. From my standpoint, there are three broad reasons why applicants don't match. Now, these reasons are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they often overlap extensively, and applicants can have a little bit of each. But there are still three broad phenotypes of unmatched applicants, and you should think about which kind you are. The first type is a competitive applicant who just applied in a field that was a little too competitive. This applies to a lot of people. I mean, last year the match rate for MD seniors trying to match in dermatology was 72%. For otolaryngology, 69%. For orthopedic surgery, 66%. For plastics, 63%. I promise you, you're not going to find many flaws in the applications of the 30% of applicants who are going unmatched in those specialties. It's just that there's a lot of people with very polished CVs and there's not that many positions available. The same thing is also true for, say, a DO applicant who's applying in anesthesiology or OBGYN or PM&R. The match rates for DO seniors in those specialties last year were all around 65%. So these, again, are very strong applicants who probably wouldn't have had any trouble matching into pediatrics or family medicine. It's a competitive field and the competition did them in. Now, the next category of unmatched applicants are those that have known weaknesses. This doesn't mean that they're going to be bad doctors. It just means that their application has some weaknesses and the applicant knows exactly what they are. Let's say you're an applicant who failed the USMLE, or maybe you went on academic probation or you took a leave of absence. Or maybe you went to a lesser known Caribbean medical school, or maybe you've gone unmatched in previous cycles and you're getting filtered out by ARIS filters. The point is there's something in your application that you can't really change at this point, but that many programs will perceive as a weakness, and they're going to move on to the next applicant without giving you a chance to explain or redeem yourself. Applicants who fall into this blue category, they're usually the least surprised when they don't match. And that's because typically they haven't gotten very many interview offers because their application got screened out by automated filters at the very beginning because of these known weaknesses. Now, the last category of unmatched applicants are those who have weaknesses or red flags in their application, but unlike a step failure or a leave of absence, the applicant doesn't always know about them. Sometimes these applicants are the most shocked when they learn they didn't match because they did a reasonable number of interviews and everything seems to be going well enough until they found out they didn't match. Most of the time, these applicants are applicants who interviewed poorly. If you got a good number of interview offers, it means that you had the basic qualifications to match at those programs, but for whatever reason, you probably didn't shine as brightly as you could have on your interview day. And if that's you, don't feel bad about yourself. Again, it does not mean that you're going to be a bad doctor. But it's a truism in life that the way that you see yourself isn't necessarily the way that others look at you. And you should think honestly and critically about the way that you interview to see if there's ways that you can present yourself better. The other thing that you should think about if you find yourself in this red category or you suspect you might be is whether there's something in your application that you can't see that's keeping you from being ranked highly. And here, the most common culprit is something in your letter's recommendation. That's especially true for people who are applying in specialties that use these standardized letters of recommendation, where you may have had the misfortune of getting a preceptor who thought you did just fine, but they don't grade inflate, and so they rate you as, quote, average, end quote, and programs take that as a red flag when they review your application carefully to rank you. So again, thinking through which of these three broad phenotypes of unmatched applicants most approximates you is helpful because the optimal strategy for each of these three groups is different. If you were a highly qualified applicant who was trying to match in a highly competitive field, well, your challenge is you got to figure out how to make yourself even more competitive. Maybe doing a research year will be more likely to get you where you want to be than panicking and scrambling into some prelim only position in the SOAP. On the other hand, if you're an applicant whose application has some known weaknesses, a prelim position might be exactly what you need. I mean, sometimes program directors worry that applicants whose CV isn't spotless aren't going to be able to handle the rigor of residency. And brother, let me tell you, there's no better way to prove that you can do residency than, by doing residency. So with that framing, I want to move on to step 3 and help you think about your options. First up is the NRMP's Supplemental Offer and Acceptance Program, or SOAP. If you take all comers, this is the best option for most unmatched applicants. But still, there's some things you need to know as you're going in. First, you need to understand that soap is not exactly a buyer's market. There's way more applicants participating in soap than there are positions left over after the match run. The data I'm showing you here are from the 2022 match, and then we had about 13,000 SOAP eligible applicants, and only 16% of them ended up accepting positions. I'm not saying this to discourage you, but if you come to me asking for advice, I'm going to give it to you straight, and I want you to know that unfortunately in SOAP, the overall odds are not in your favor. But different groups have different degrees of success in SOAP. If you break it down by applicants' educational background, you can see that 57% of DO seniors got a position in the SOAP, while only 3% of non-US citizen international medical graduates did. You should also be aware of the types of residency positions that are likely to be available in the SOAP. Now, you're not going to know the exact programs that have unfilled positions until you find out that you've unmatched. Um, but at that point, at 10 a.m. on the Monday of match week, you'll get access to the program list in the NRMP's computer system. So even though you don't know the individual programs that you can apply to, you should still think about what types of programs may be available and how that may impact your strategy or your decision to participate in the SOAP. If you didn't match in a highly competitive specialty, there's probably going to be very few or zero unfilled positions left over in the SOAP. Again, these are data from the 2022 match. So as you can see, by the time that the match run was done, there were only 5 positions left in dermatology. There were only 4 in OBGYN, 3 in general surgery, 2 in PM&R, 0 in anesthesia, and 0 for the surgical specialties, including otolaryngology, orthopedics, vascular, plastics, etc. In contrast, there tends to be a good number of categorical family medicine and internal medicine positions available in the SOAP. You can see around 900 were available last year. In 2022, we also had 217 emergency medicine positions available in the SOAP. My guess is that we'll see an even higher number this year. If you want to know why, I've got a separate video on that topic. Um, but if you take those away, you can see that the other type of position that's available in SOAP are these preliminary PGY1 only positions in general surgery or in medicine. There's also a number of transitional year positions that are available. And you need to understand these are PGY1 only positions, meaning that if you're offered and accept one of them, you're going to have to develop a plan to get into a categorical residency to complete your training, either through the match or outside of it after you've been there for a year. So if you choose to SOAP, the first thing you got to do is clearly define victory. What would a win look like in the SOAP for you, in your situation and with your career goals? For instance, some applicants who didn't match in psychiatry, well, they might be very happy counseling patients in the family medicine clinic. Maybe picking up a family medicine categorical position would be a good choice for them. For some people, that wouldn't meet their career goals. For some applicants who say didn't match in anesthesiology, well, they might be happy doing internal medicine and then trying to move into critical care. Others who didn't match in anesthesia, well, maybe they're better off doing a surgery prelim year and fighting for a categorical anesthesia position the following year. For applicants who have weaker applications, any residency position is usually better than none. Many applicants who struggle to match through multiple cycles, they finally get their foot in the door by taking a prelim position, and then they seize that opportunity and knock the program director's socks off by working hard and being reliable, and they use that experience to get a categorical position by the time that they're done with their prelim year, or at least they get a strong endorsement from the program to go somewhere else. My point is, you've got to decide for you whether participating in the SOAP makes sense in your situation, and if so, what kind of position would be a win? It's a situation-specific question, and it depends in part on what other options you have. But if you choose to participate in SOAP, the next thing you got to do is you got to clear your calendar. If you're a student who's on a clinical rotation, you need to be excused. If you're a prelim resident who's doing a particular rotation, you need to be covered by your colleagues as much as you possibly can be, because in SOAP, things are going to move very quickly, and you need to be prepared to seize any opportunity that presents. When you SOAP, there's a certain amount of paperwork you're going to have to do. Most applicants end up using the same ARIS application that they use for the regular season. But if you do worry that you have a hidden red flag, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, it is possible to upload new letters of recommendation or even a new personal statement. But if you want to do that, you're obviously going to have to move very quickly. Now, if you're a student who attends a reputable school, then all the preparation that you need for SOAP, it may happen automatically. Your deans may swoop in and help guide you, and you'll just move into a conference room in the administrative suite and stay there for the whole week until things get worked out and people work the phones and you'll take interviews. But for other schools or for applicants who are no longer in school, you may have to advocate for yourself a little bit more. The next thing you need to know are the SOAP traffic rules because things happen quickly and there's a lot of applicants and there's very few positions. And so in this context, the NRMP makes some traffic rules that you don't want to run afoul of. The most important one of these is that you can't contact programs. You have to wait for them to contact you. Now, this rule actually applies to mentors and advisors and anyone else who acts on your behalf. They're not allowed to contact programs either. I will say that that rule is not always universally observed and that back channel communications do occur, especially among more privileged applicants. But you should know that it is a match violation and it can be reported to the NRMP. And if you're an applicant, you're going to be banned from the match the following year if you're found guilty of that. You're also not allowed to share the list of unfilled programs. In the past, there's actually been cases when the NRMP has sued entities that have shared the list of unfilled programs online. Another difference between SOAP and the regular application process that you need to know about is that applications are limited. This year, applicants can apply to only 45 programs. So make sure that any and all programs that you choose to apply to are in line with your definition of victory. This year, SOAP is going to consist of 4 individual rounds, and you don't necessarily have to put in all your applications at the very beginning. But if your goal is to get a position, then my strong advice is that you should submit at least 43 or 44 of them, if not all 45, at the very beginning. If you want to understand why I give that advice, put yourself in the program shoes. They've just spent 4 months recruiting applicants, and they came up empty-handed. They want those positions filled as soon as possible. If they find someone who is capable and enthusiastic, they're going to snap them up. The overwhelming majority of SOAP positions get filled in the first of the 4 SOAP rounds. But there may be a couple of positions that slip through the cracks. And if you have an application or 2 left over, you could submit it in the 4th and final round of SOAP. So if you want to hold on to 1 or maybe at most 2 applications to use as a last minute Hail Mary in the 4th round, I'm not going to be mad at you. But understand that most applicants should go all in to maximize their chance in the first round. And you're almost certainly decreasing your chance of coming out with a position, especially a highly desirable one, if you hold back more than that. If you do get an interview, or certainly if you get an offer, then my go all in advice applies even more. Again, remember, the average program and applicant wants to get SOAP over with as soon as possible. If you get a chance, and the chance that you get fits with your predetermined definition of victory, you pounce on it. If you get a bird that lands in your hand, don't let me catch you rooting around in the bush trying to get a different bird. And that's really all I want to say right now about SOAP. But be aware that SOAP is not the only option for unmatched applicants. And so I'm now going to move on to option number 2, which is a year of research. This may be a good option for competitive applicants who are applying in competitive fields, like I highlighted at the beginning, that yellow category. An increasing number of applicants in the most competitive fields like dermatology or otolaryngology have completed a research year by the time that they enter residency. And sometimes those applicants have failed to match and then done a research year and then been successful. So if you've already got a shiny resume, but you've got to make it more shiny, this could be an option for you. And for some people in that situation, it could be a better choice than taking a position in the SOAP. Now, some research positions, they're just positions. They're just posted by the mentor or the lab, and they could be filled by anyone. You don't have to be an MD or somebody who didn't match. But there's an increasing number of so-called research fellowships that are sponsored by residency programs in competitive fields, often at very well-known and prestigious institutions. And what they purport to offer is research mentorship and some clinical exposure or maybe some integration with the residency program. And they suggest that participating in their program is going to lead to success for unmatched applicants when they apply again in next year's match cycle. These can be a good option for some people, but here again, there are some traffic rules that you need to be aware of. Every year, some institutions will advertise their research fellowship positions during match week, even though they probably shouldn't. Because if you're a SOAP eligible applicant, you're not allowed to accept the position if it's affiliated with a residency program that participated in the match. So before you sign on the dotted line, you'll want to make sure that you're not going to run afoul of the NRMP's policy, which I've screenshotted here. A third option, for some applicants at least, is to delay your graduation. Now, obviously, this is only an option if you haven't yet graduated, but it's become increasingly common for schools to offer an extra year of school to students who didn't match. Make no mistake, this is self-serving. It helps the school in two ways at least. For one, even though students don't usually pay full price tuition, the student still has to pay some money for hanging around for that fifth year. But for another, it allows the school to cook the books on their match numbers. Most medical schools report their match statistics to the public based on the number of students that were graduating. So if you have a student who doesn't match and then they get moved back to the following year's graduating class, well, they just got removed from the denominator of the match calculation, and the school gets to report a higher match rate among the people who are graduating that year. But honestly, taking an extra year in school can help many students too. For one thing, it may help keep you from getting screened out by automated ARIS filters in subsequent match cycles. The issue here is that because we live in a world with application fever, all residency programs get way more applications than they need. And reviewing all of them, even just superficially, would take more time than most program directors have. So programs use different filters and ARIS to limit the applications that they're actually going to review and read. So maybe you only want to see applicants whose USMLE Step 2 CK was above 230, let's say, or maybe you only want to see applicants who don't require a work visa. But one other very commonly used filter in ARIS is the year of graduation filter. So many programs limit their reviews to applicants who are graduating that year, or maybe within a couple of recent years. It's a shortcut. The thinking here is that if someone failed to match in previous cycles, there's a reason for it. So the program can either spend their time scouring the application and trying to ferret out whatever that reason was, or they can just take the shortcut and assume that whoever else reviewed the application in previous years knew what they were doing, and by screening them out or failing to rank them highly, there was a reason for it. I'm not saying this is fair. I'm not saying it's right, but it does occur. And keen-eyed viewers may have noticed a few minutes ago when I was showing you the match rates that the match rates for graduating MD and DO students were in the 92 to 93%, but the match rates for previous MD and DO graduates who were reapplying were lower than the match rates for international medical graduates. So by staying in school, an applicant gets to stay in a more favored category, at least as far as ARIS filters are concerned. The other potential benefit of delaying graduation is for students who decide to switch specialties. So some applicants who didn't match in plastic surgery or orthopedics, they may be very competitive applicants in, say, anesthesia or radiology. And they may look at their chances of being in the 65% that match or the 35% that don't in subsequent cycles, and they may think that it's not worth it, and that may be a very reasonable decision. Similarly, someone who didn't match in OBGYN, they might be highly sought after in family medicine. But if you're looking at just family medicine positions available in the SOAP, you may not have the ones that you desire the most. And so an applicant in that situation may benefit from taking a year to recalibrate and launch themselves into the different field with the full set of options available. And that idea about recalibration, and that leads into my fourth possibility that some applicants may want to consider. I put that here as other because it could be a lot of things. It could be someone who was, let's say, starting to question whether they really had the fire in the belly to do clinical medicine. And I don't know, maybe their interviews kind of picked up on that and they didn't match. And now they seize the opportunity of being unmatched to take their MD and go into some other field. Now, you can't practice medicine without doing at least an internship, but many doctors have skills and backgrounds that will make them successful in fields that are adjacent to clinical medicine, like technology or pharma or even the business of medicine. Or maybe it's someone who desperately wants to do clinical medicine and they want to practice in the United States, but they got a low USMLE Step 1 score when they took the test 7 or 8 years ago. And of course, that's a one-shot deal with no backsies. And even though they've applied and applied year after year, it's just never happened for them. And now each cycle, they're getting fewer interview invites because they're getting screened out by Step 1 or your graduation filters. But maybe an applicant like that has opportunities to pursue training or to practice in another country. And maybe in their situation, that's the best course to take. My point here is it's your life, and it's fair to consider the opportunity cost and the alternatives available, all of them. You don't have to answer to anybody but yourself. And I honestly deeply believe in my soul there's no single true path for almost any of us. The goals that we set and the paths that we take are the product of so many truly random things that came before. But you could have been put on a different path and you would have been happy and successful and made genuine contributions to the world and the people around you. And so for many of us, maybe you shouldn't be afraid to put yourself on a different path and pursue it just as doggedly as you pursued the path that you've been on. You got to do what's right for you. And that brings me to my final piece of advice, which is this. Once you make your plan, work it. Don't look back. It sucks not to match. And I wish that hadn't happened to you. But this is not the end of your story. All the obstacles that you overcame to get here, all that stuff really happened. That was you. And all the people who believed in you and they saw promise in you and they gave you opportunities to get this far, they weren't wrong. You keep your head up. You take on whatever's next with grace and dignity. And remember that I'll be here cheering for you. And that's about all I've got to say about that. Thanks for listening.